get told, I guess.
We go.
Excellent.
Cool.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the session.
So today we are going to go through automating VMware Cloud Foundation using day one operations with PowerShell and APIs. So my name's James Tiffany. I'm a senior technical adoption manager at Broadcom. Been there about 3 years now, but I've been using VMware products for 15 plus years.
My name is Stephan McTighe. I've been at Broadcom for now about 2 years, or VMware before that. I've been in the industry around 15 years with doing various little bits and pieces along the way with operations, engineering, design, and now I'm a technical account manager at VMware by Broadcom. Our disclaimer, you've probably seen this a couple of times already. Please take note of it for this particular session. I'll just give you a second or so just to take those points in.
Okay. So, why automate? That's the question most people normally ask. So, repeatability, the ability to take a set of code, be able to distribute it amongst multiple members of staff, different environments, and be able to get the same outcome each time you're running it.
Speed and efficiency is another good thing. Manual tasks take time. If you're clicking around a UI, it takes time. Being actually not having to wait on somebody to actually run a task in a UI, the amount of times you'll kick off a task, you'll come back a few minutes later and realize it may have actually finished 20 minutes ago. It's wasted time, it's wasted efficiency. You can also start to run things in parallel. If you're automating things using a programming language or things like PowerShell, using an API, you can be doing concurrent tasks. Helps you a lot with that speed and efficiency side of thing. And it also could be event-driven. Again, removing somebody from the equation altogether, bringing that speed and efficiency, getting things done when they've got a problem or when there's an action or a trigger that needs something to happen.
Anyone who's been around, when it comes to documentation, if you are using things like the UI, trying to document something like that is hundreds of screenshots. If the version changes, you then have to go back and change all those screenshots. It can become messy. If you're using code, it's a block of code. That's it. You don't have to worry about 10 pages worth of click here, do this. It's a block of code, nice and easy to change if you need to in the future.
Yeah. And then finally, it's about consistency. Everybody here has probably at some point in their time been an admin, and you've probably witnessed different members of a team do the same task 10 different ways. Everybody has their own little way of doing something because it's the way they've always done it. Once you've got something coded, whether that is as a script or just executing a command, you're going to get a level of consistency. It's a set out procedure, as James has just mentioned. It's a block of code. You might change the values that are going into that, but the execution of it is going to be consistent. So you get a bit of uniform capability with that. There's a lot to start with some of this, so we kind of wanted to give you a bit of a journey as we go. And APIs potentially can be quite a scary thing for people. I know when I first came across using one, it was to replace a certificate on NSX. I kind of went, well, why do I need to use an API to do this? I've never done that before. Where do I start? So actually knowing what the APIs are is probably the first step. So inside SDDC Manager, you can make use of the API Explorer. All of the APIs that exist and are available to you are all listed right within the SDDC Manager UI, and you can make use of those. There it is. There's a little snapshot. If anyone wants a QR code, really quick, that takes you to the API development docs, which match that as well. Quickly get your phones out if anyone needs that. So it'll be an exact match, which just happens to be on a website rather than an SDDC Manager UI.
So there's so much information out there already. and during the creation of this presentation, we used a number of those that's out there. So two that we're calling out is Martin and Brian's pages. So Martin has created a web page that you can go in, enter all the information, and it'll kick out a JSON file at the end of it. So the SDDC Manager API will give you the format, but then you've got to go in and fill in all that information. So you can use that to create a template that you can then edit, update moving forward. And we were using Brian's for some of the coding he already had out there.
And again, a couple of QR codes for both of those if you wanted to hit either of those resources up there. Great resources. Let's talk a little bit now about the tools that we're going to look at today. So we got a couple across the line here. We're going to start off with the first one, which is Postman.
So all of the key API commands can be run through the SDDC Manager. You can go onto the SDDC Manager command line and run them as well. But why would you? So some of the tools we're talking about, Postman is one of many that allows you to run those same commands, but remotely, connect to the SDDC Manager, run the same command, but it's remote. Then we go into things like PowerShell. Pretty much everyone knows what PowerShell is and can do, but we'll be using that throughout the presentation to make the API calls that we'll demo to you guys.
And then finally, as the demos go on, we've got quite a few demos, and we're going to have to get through them at quite a pace to try and give you as much as we can. It's going to be mainly around Power VCF. Anybody heard of Power VCF? Quick show of hands. That's a better response to last one than I asked that question, so that's great. So any of you that haven't seen this, it's effectively a module within PowerShell. PowerShell is made up of modules of commandlets, which is effectively a bunch of commands that have been bundled together to make your life easier. And basically what you'll see is a lot of the work that we do in the PowerShell and API bit has had all the hard work done by a great team and put into a PowerShell module to actually make your life really easy when it comes to administering day one actions. So we're going to move over into one of the first demos. There's going to be some code. We're going to have some videos. We didn't sacrifice enough to the demo gods for this. So we didn't necessarily want to do anything live, just in case we got some connectivity issues. So we got some recordings to kind of show you some outputs, and we'll touch on those as we go through. So the first thing we need to be looking at when we are doing anything with an API is we need to authenticate with SDDC Manager. If we're not authenticated, we're not allowed to do anything. So what we've got here is an example of three. We could run an API call, which is actually the tokens API, V1 tokens. We've run that in Postman. Could run that directly in SDDC Manager. Doesn't really help you automate anything as much though, but it is there as that remote execution. We've then got the PowerShell and API. So what we are making use of again is that API of the tokens API. And the main commandlet that we're using here, which is native in PowerShell, is the invoke REST method commandlet. That is going to be used throughout that whole section of being able to actually execute these API calls natively from PowerShell. And you'll kind of see what that looks like in a minute, and why you probably want to use Power VCF instead. So the final one is Power VCF, and request VCF token is going to be the command that we're going to take a quick look at. So we'll move over to some code over here, and James will have a quick talk through that first file.
So you can see the code up there. So what we've done is we've used Splat to do it. So you can use, everyone programs differently, but what we found is Splat is a great way of taking a huge line, putting it into a much easier readable format that is much easier to then edit as well. You're still passing in all the same information, the URIs, the headers, and the body, like the username and password and stuff like that, but the format of it for some people is much easier. So we'll be using that as we go along. So again, it goes to the tokens URI on the SDDC Manager. It's passing over the content type being the application JSON. You're posting to it and then you pass it the information. So you're giving it the username and the password, and then it's going to run the command and give you the output. So at the bottom, you can see that we've variabilized the output as well, which then means you can use that in the next set of code. So what you see is this is like the starting point for most of the code, and as we go through it, you'll see that you can then start chaining it together to get the outcomes you're looking for.
Brilliant. We'll quickly just flip back and do a quick video on that particular one. If it will let me, there we go. So I'll let James talk about this.
So just highlighting the code and running it, and you can see at the end of it, it gives you the massive long token, and that's the token you'll then need to authenticate each time you're running remote commands.
And I'll flip back over to this code. James, if you could just step back ever so slightly for me, thank you. So this is exactly the same thing, basically. But as you can probably already tell, there's a lot less going on there. It's a lot cleaner, a lot easier to look at. And there's another technique here of showing your code and displaying it. The splatting technique kind of makes it a little bit easier to read and uses an array to be able to do that. This is just using line breaks within PowerShell. So having the space backtick syntax on the line means that you can start to drop your parameters onto a separate line. And again, all we're doing here is invoking request VCF token, put an FQDN, username, password, getting a token. It doesn't actually deliver it back to you necessarily. It keeps it in session because somebody's done all of the coding work behind the scenes for that commandlet. You are then, once you've got effectively a blank response, which we'll see in a second, you're good to go. And everybody down the bottom there has probably at some point ran connect VI server at some point. That is just exactly the same command, but rather than connecting to an SDDC manager, that's connecting to your vCenter server, which I believe was in the session previous to us as well. So, and then we'll just quickly take a look at a video for that one. And you'll see it's a very similar thing. It runs, and it's kind of a null event. Oh, in fact, it does give me a response. I forgot it did. There we go. So we get the exact same response, two different ways. Probably when you look at it on the face of it, two very different levels of complexity if you've never seen it before. So
when we came up with this session, what we were looking at was there's loads of stuff out there for doing the actual bring up. There's Terraform, there's loads of stuff, but that doesn't actually get you to a production ready, workable environment. There's still a number of tasks that you'd need to do after the bring up to get you something's usable. So an example is running up an environment for patch testing. You bring it up, but a bring up doesn't have the SSO configured. It doesn't have all of those production things that make your environment that when you run that test mean that you're potentially happy to do it. So another thing is the online depot. So that is configuring it so that it can talk to the VMware depot to pull down patches. So normally you can go into the UI and do it, but what we're talking about is being able to automate all of those steps that then gets you to that final outcome without you having to do it all manually. So on here, you've got we're doing the depot command, and then you can see inside Power VCF, you've got the ability to set it and then report back on it as well.
Yep, so we'll take a quick look at some code for this one. If I can find my mouse again. There it is.
So as I mentioned, we talked earlier about authenticating. This will be the last one to make it a lot easier for you guys to read. This is the last time we'll show actually getting the tokens. But this is where you can start chaining things together. So in this, you run the token, you get the token, and it's being reported as $SDDC token. And then in the actual code below, you can see instead of typing in the username and, in the authorization part, we're just calling that already saved variable. We're then putting it to the SDDC manager, putting in the username and password, which is already variabilized. So that means that you can save that code, you can present it to people without having username and passwords everywhere as well. And then you just run it against the SDDC manager.
Excellent. Rather than flick back and forth between screens and save a bit of time, I'll quickly show you now the code, looking at the PowerVCF angle. So again, probably seeing a level of complexity and the differences there. You know, quite a busy bit of code on the other example. Somebody's done all the hard work for you here and pulled that all into an existing command within the PowerVCF module. So we've got here the set VCF depot credential, using the slightly different technique rather than splatting and just using the line breaks, and actually just passing a username and password from a variable. You know, we're not, hopefully everybody here doesn't just type their passwords and usernames into any code that they save. We all might have done it once upon a time, but we want to be passing those in securely, and you know, that might be coming from being called from a vault of some sort, you know, a password secret management system, pulled into an environment variable within PowerShell, passed into this command, and away it goes. So we'll now just quickly go through and show you those videos. And first up, we've got the PowerShell API. So again, being pulled through and ran. That's the credential coming through. And then, unless that did it very quick. Oh no, there we go, it's still going. And then it's going on to the second bit of the depot now. And we'll see that we've got a nice depot configured, and you've got username and password all ready to go. Patch is going to come down. And in PowerVCF, you're going to see the exact same thing. So what we'll start to do is we won't necessarily show you every single demo video, because you're going to get really bored of watching the same thing happen and us right-clicking and hitting run code. But same code, you're going to get the exact same output. You're going to get a configured online depot. Popping that into a pipeline and then various other scripts, and you know, you can start to build up your automation capabilities. So the next one that you're going to probably want to do at this point is start to add some licensing. You're probably already going to, well, you will already have licensing in there from your original bring up, but we're talking about what you're doing after your bring up. This could include workload domains, clusters, things like that. You're going to need to have licensing in SDDC Manager to be able to build those clusters and workload domains. So you see a similar format here. We're going to go through and we're going to use an API. So this time it is the license keys API. And then we also have the new VCF license key commandlet. So let's have a quick look at what we've got code-wise for this one.
So in here, as you said, we're going for the license keys. So this has the ability to, as you get down into the actual body, is where you have the license key itself. Again, you could variabilize that, but then you can choose the product type. So you've got ESI, NSX, vSAN, all the different combinations that you can put in there. You can give it a description, and that will be the field that shows up in the SDDC manager. So if, for example, you were doing licensing for a boundary of a database type product, then you could put a description in to make sure that when you're using those keys, they're used for the right reason.
Just another little add to that, I think James used the term body. That happens to just be the parameter for that. If you've come across the term payload before, that kind of interchanges with that, just in case you've heard some different different terminology for that. And then let's have a look at this slightly cleaner piece again. And again, we're just variabilizing here. You know, we don't want to be hard coding in any of your scripts really, or any automation that you want to do, because it just makes your life harder. So always look to try and variabilize, and we're going to pass in some keys. Obviously, we're not going to show you any free keys because we don't really do giveaways. And we've got ESXi keys and vSAN keys there, and we're going to add those in. As you can see, we didn't really use the technique here because I wanted to give you the example of these are actually kind of slightly longer. Doesn't quite meet the screen length on this particular thing because we've got a nice big screen, but if you were on a slightly smaller screen, you might find that you've got to start scrolling around to see what that is if you're making changes to things. So having those techniques to be able to make your code more human friendly in terms of readability, that's why we were using those techniques. So we'll go on to the next demo. There we go. And we'll just show one of these. I don't think we necessarily need to show them twice. You're going to see the same result in both cases. So James is here running the code. And you'll then see it all nicely loaded up in here. And there we go. Just dropped an extra key in. Nice and easy, no clicking, no typing. You've done all that before. Happy days.
So next on the list is deploying the AVN. Does everyone know what AVN is? No? It's a construct inside in VCF. It's application virtual network. It allows you to create network constructs that can be used later on with conjunction of things like ARIA to deploy the load balancer on those functions. So you don't have to have it if you're not going to integrate ARIA, but 9 times out of 10 is something that you're going to need going forward. So this just goes through. What you'll start seeing now is the ability to do validations as well. So inside the PowerShell API, you can tell it to go and validate the input that you're giving it to make sure that when you actually run it properly, then it will work. And for Power VCF, it's add the command there.
Excellent. So let's take a quick look at some of that code on the AVM front.
So what we're starting to use now is the JSON file, so the construct to be able to pass the command, tell it to go and look at a JSON that holds the information. So for our demos, the majority of the JSONs are pre-configured. Now you don't have to have them. Like I said, with Martin's webpage, you can get the construct. You can then look to add information in, calling from key vaults from, what's the network one? You can, forgotten what I said. Yeah, so you can start pulling the information into the JSON. Ours, just for this demo, is already hard-coded. But what it's doing is at the top there, you're putting in the variable, you're telling it where the actual JSON is, and so that it can read it in. So you're then using the URI for the validations. You're passing your SDDC token over to it. Now, the SDDC token lives for a while, but what we're doing here is we're not assuming that you're running all of these one after another. So you can run them separately. So you can do that way. And then it's calling in the variable for the location of the JSON file, passes it over to the SDDC manager. It will then check it and then tell you whether it's good or not. If it is good, you can then move on to actually running it directly. So instead of doing the validation, you're running it directly against the URI, and then you'll get a message at the end of it to say it's processing and when it's completed as well.
Excellent. And again, we'll take now a look at the alternative using the Power VCF. Now, as James already pointed out, we are just passing a pre-configured JSON file here. And as we start to go through some of the remaining demos in this, not everything can just be passed as a value, as a parameter against anything. It's actually going to take its entire input as a JSON file. That is how the command works. Not much you can do about it. So in this example, it's trying to give you an idea of that you can run a pre-configured file quite quickly and quite easily on a single line. So you might already have an environment that perhaps has been torn down and being rebuilt, or you're building labs or test rigs. being able to just have those files there that you know are already created and already have the parameters you need, you can just keep recalling those over and over and fire them out in a single one-line command. And we'll just have a quick look at the videos for those. This time, let's do the Power VCF video this time. And we'll just show you the one. So I'm showing it from an NSX perspective here. What you would normally see is that we're going to start to get some segments. So we have ran that already. It doesn't take long. It's already going to kick off that piece of work. In the background, it has gone off and it has now created that AVN, the Application Virtual Network. So inside NSX Manager now, we can see 2 new segments. Can't tell from this angle exactly which ones they are, but they are, I think, the top and the bottom one from this blurry angle, which then is where you can have the ARIA components deployed against. And there you have it. You have a deployed Application Virtual Network.
Let's speed it up.
Let's talk about commissioning hosts now. We touched on it a minute ago. Once you've deployed your initial bring up and you've got a management domain, you're going to want to run some workloads. So to do that, we need some hosts. Same kind of thing again. We're going to use some APIs. We've got the validations piece in here again. We want to validate the input that's coming through. We're then going to execute against the hosts. And we then have the new VCF commissioned host PowerShell command in which to take a look at. So let's have a look at the code for this one. Long wait.
Video.
There we go. There we go.
So in this, the JSON file is holding the number of hosts. It can be 1 host, it can be 50 hosts. It's taking the information in that JSON file. So when you create the JSON file, you either can do it with 1 server or all of the servers. And the commissioning is adding the server entries into the SDDC Manager database so it knows that those hosts can be used going forward. So inside that COML JSON, it has, in this example, I think it's got 3 hosts in there. And again, passing over the token, we're taking the variable that we create at the top there and passing it over. It'll do the validation. As long as that passes, then you run the command and you'll then see the servers all in the SDDC Manager database.
And I guess just one point to this. At this point now, you'd probably begin to see that what you're looking at on these particular parts of the demo, it all looks the same, right? Does anybody actually think they've looked at something different if we put the same piece of code in front of you like 4 times now, right? It is slightly different, but when we talked earlier about consistency and repeatability, once you've understood the construct of it to start with, it's something you can then continually keep taking forward, keep using, keep repeating, and saves you time. I've lost my mouse again. There we go. We're going to do a slightly different concept on this one. So we're kind of a bit of an evolution into what we're doing here. We mentioned before, and in the previous bit of code that was on the screen, we were referencing a pre-configured JSON file. Realistically, that's probably not a real-world scenario because you're probably not going to want to store all that information and have lots of different iterations of it potentially. You're going to want to maybe a little bit more dynamic, bring into that reusability side of it again. So what we actually did here, and I will quickly try and flip to one of the JSON files to just show you what's happening. We created a templated version of one of these JSON files. What you can see we've got going on here is I've created some placeholders within that file, being the FQDNs, and I think it says host password from here again. It's a really shiny screen from this angle. And what I'm actually doing is just a really basic find and replace, but using PowerShell to do that. So it's going to go and take that JSON file, replace the values with something that has been fed in to your console session at the time, so into that PowerShell even session, and then being consumed. So that file isn't actually being outputted anywhere. It's pulling that template file into memory, editing it on the fly, putting that back into a variable in memory, feeding into command, delivering you an end result. I'm not going to show you the video for this one. You're just going to have to believe us that this will spit out some nice hosts at the end. I'm going to show you just that there is a picture of it complete because it is a slightly longer video and we're a little bit tighter on time. So if I was to go to the end of this video, it will show me nothing. And we'll just pause that there. Oh, come on. Could have just played it by now. There you go. You can see at the bottom there, we've got 3 unassigned hosts that we've pulled in through that configuration, okay? And to you.
So you can see it's moving on. So we've done the tokens, licenses, and then you get into the actual cluster deployment. So as part of this, you can chain all of those together. You don't have to like commission a host separately. You can do this as part of the whole command as we go through. Again, it's you're validating against the cluster's URI.
Cool. And we've got the new VCF command. You're probably beginning to get the theme on this. Everything seems to just basically be named on what it's doing. And you're starting to see a pattern, hopefully. So we'll shift over to the code.
And again, that's what we were talking about with the splat format. You've got the first part of the URI, and then you can just then replace the part that needs replacing at the end. It's instead of having a long line that you'd have to scroll along to potentially find it, you can just go to the URI, change the URI, and you're ready to go. So in here, again, we're referencing in this one, we are doing the commissioning of the ESXi servers and then going into the cluster itself as well. So it'll do the validation of the hosts. Once that's done, add the hosts in there. It then moves down. It then validates the JSON information around the cluster. So again, template. As you saw previously, you have the ability to maybe variabilize, find and replace. But in here, we're just going for a straight JSON to make it easier. And then you can run the command to create the cluster. And then at the bottom, you get the information around the status of it, because that will take about 20 minutes maybe to run. You can keep getting the update from the command line to see what's going on.
And then back over to the Power VCF. Trying to take this again a bit further. We're using variables. Variables should be using anything, hard coding anything really now into any kind of script or code is probably not the best practice you could use. So making use of variables and inputting those, not necessarily as a documented variable like that, but into your terminal sessions, pulling those from somewhere, or another system that's providing information. We're going to do the find and replace again this time. Again, taking a templated JSON file. I've only templated a couple of values here. In reality, you could replace absolutely any value in that file that you wanted to. If there was something that was going to change or be unique to a particular running or deployment of a use of this code, you could redo it. And then we're going to start to tie that kind of into the bits that hang code together. We haven't done a huge amount of how to use PowerShell in this because that's not what the name of this session's about. But what we can't do as part of this is roll straight from host commission into deploy cluster, because if we were to run it without the the while commands on lines 19 to 22 there, it would just fail, because it would run the commands to go, I want you to go and run commission host. Cool, I told it's going to do that. I'm now going to go and build a cluster. Hang on a minute, I don't have any hosts. So using the while construct is actually quite useful, because you can sit there building a condition to say, I won't want you to do anything until we get the value that I want or the conclusion that I want. So that just goes and sleeps through. It's great. And there's some good resources out there. If you ever to look at William Lamb's blog, for instance, he's got some great deployment scripts where it kind of ties a lot of stuff together. You can see either snippets of code like that in the work that he's done as well. And if we just scroll down a little bit, there's the final bit of the cluster code, kind of following that same construct, and the new VCF cluster at the bottom, taking that dynamically built JSON file in.
And hopefully from seeing the two different ways of doing it, you can see the easy working. You can then start making the changes and the difference between the two, you can see that one's using a hard-coded, one's using variables. So you can start off nice and easy and take it as far as you want, but it's still automation.
Get my mouse to do something useful. There we go. In the essence of time, I'm not going to show you the video of that because we're going to go into workload domain next, which is going to show you something very similar. It's going to contain a cluster, so we'll save some time on that one. So workload domain deployment. Everyone here, or is anybody aware of what a workload domain is? Yeah, we've got a few hands, okay. A workload domain is just a logical entity which will have a vCenter and then some clusters, and they can be managed independently from another workload domain. So it can be really good for kind of multi-tenancy or multi-purpose environments. We're back at this again. Validations, again, we've seen them on clusters and hosts. We've also got them on domains, making sure that the content that you're putting in is valid. And it's a valid construct, let's probably put it. If you've put a load of rubbish into a valid construct, it's still rubbish. It will pass validation, but you're not necessarily going to get the result you want out of it, okay? And we've got the matching command, which is in a new VCF workload domain as well. So let's take a look at this code. There we go. Is that the right one? Or have I clicked the wrong one?
No.
Wrong one. Step back slightly, James, because I can't see me mouse. Sorry.
You talk about
Oh, yeah, we'll talk about this. There we go. So we'll do it in a reverse order just to make sure everybody's still awake. Again, same context as what we just saw in the last one, but we're just now targeting a completely different object, being a workload domain this time. We're still using some while commands because, again, I need to wait for first set of actions to complete appropriately. But this find and replace thing is really good, you know, being at the fact that you can have a templated file, which comes back to that consistency and that repeatability. Every engineer that would ever use this or admin can get the same result because they're going to use the same template. They're just going to feed the unique values they need for their deployment in there. So it's probably very similar to what you've just seen, but there you go.
So workload domain has a lot more information in it. So for cluster, you're just telling it what host to use, cluster name, information like that. Whereas the workload domain, being the whole construct, is it deploys a new virtual center, it will deploy new NSX managers. So you have to give it a lot more information, hence why the actual JSON itself is substantially larger. And as Stephan showed, there's a lot more information that you can edit and find and replace and stuff like this. Inside here, we're just doing, as the other ones, the validation against it, and then we'll be executing it. And this one will take a lot longer than the others that we've been talking about. So again, you can get feedback on how it's doing. Obviously, you can look in the SDDC Manager UI. The whole point is we're automating it, and then it will tell you at the end, once it's completed.
And what we'll do is just very, very quickly, here is what a JSON file might look like. I've put the variables in here for certain elements. This is effectively what you're calling to pass in. And as James pointed out, there's complexities to this because there's a lot more components. So. Sorry.
What is certificates? If you want to, so that's as part of the data operations. In our organization, we constantly has to update those certificates. We are planning
Yep.
This one has one kind of a follow from the certified
Yeah, no, it absolutely can. So for the benefit of any that can hear that, the question was around, can we do actions around certificates within the SDDC Manager ecosystem? The answer is yes. We don't actually have that one in this particular deck because we have another presentation tomorrow where we've covered that particular piece. So we didn't want to kind of do the same thing twice. But absolutely, yeah, when it comes to configuring like the CA for maybe you want a Microsoft CA or an Open SSL, all that configuration can be done using the APIs as well, PowerShell, along with replacement actions as well. So yeah. I believe it can, but don't quote me on that. Maybe let's have a conversation at the end, and I'll when we've got a bit more time, if that's okay. Right, we've taken a look at the code. Let's just quickly I'm going to show you the end of this video. Again, because this one's quite a long one, and we don't necessarily want to sit and watch a boring video. But I'm running some code, as we've seen in the previous demos. I'm going to skip through some of this. You'll see you've got your actions going on in the SDDC Manager console, where it's doing the various bits of the deployment, vCenters, NSX, host commissions, cluster build-outs. That's all going on right now, and there's different parts of that happening. And at the end of it, we should see there, if you can just about see that on there, there is a new cluster in that list that's been added, and away you go. We're going to quickly now move on to credential management.
So those are tasks that you can run through that gets your environment built, but there's still extra steps you can take. And credential management is built into the SDDC Manager, so that gives you the ability to rotate passwords, to set them, to do policies on them. So you can start using the SDDC Manager to centralize some of the tasks that you might need for compliancy or just general best practice.
So towards this point, I'm hoping everybody's beginning to see the benefit of using PowerVCF over the API method. It's a lot less complex. Somebody's done all the hard work for you, all the error checking, all the validation's been done and coded into those functions within the module. So for these, we're not going to show you that because you've seen it all by now. It's probably got a little bit samey, right? So there's a bunch of commands here. We can set credentials, we can get credentials, we can set rotation policies, and we can also set expiries because they're important as well. So we'll jump over on the code for this one. So in this, following the same principles again, we're going to do some find and replaces into a JSON file. So this top section there is setting a credential to a password that I am predefining and telling it. So that may be something you pull from what's the word I'm looking for? A secret management solution or a vault and passed in rather than being coded. And the second example, which we've got down here, is actually telling SDDC Manager, please go and rotate the password. You decide what it's going to be, and I'll find it out afterwards. I will go and pull that back out. So what you could do off the back of this is run the get command, which you'll see a little bit further down here, where I now want to go and get the credential that's just been set on a rotate. You could then pass that back out into a secret management system using PowerShell, yeah? And then one little extra two at the bottom, setting the auto rotation policies. You'll see here's the example where splatting could be really useful, right? I've got to start scrolling over. I'm telling it I want it to be setting an auto rotation policy on NSX Manager. I want you to connect using SSH. I want you to do it on the audit username on NSX, and I want you to set a frequency of every 30 days. If you were to go into SDDC Manager after running that command, you would see against the password management section for the audit account in NSX, there'd be a 30-day password rotation set and ready to go. And finally, getting a credential for the particular resource I want. You provide the host name, telling it what type of resource it is, and it will return that value into the command for you. If that was a case of, you're about to go and do some manual administration or some break fix, it's a way of you getting out the passwords out of the system. We'll now just go over on to access management. And James is going to quickly talk about that one.
So again, our thought process behind this is how do you get from bring up to an actual production ready system, and one of the tasks that you're not showing it.
Would help, wouldn't it?
One of the tasks that most people do is inside Virtual Center would be to set up an SSO domain so that you can use groups, permissioning and things like that. And you can do that through PowerVCF as well. So you've got the ability to do it two ways. You can actually target the Virtual Center, configure it, and that will pass the information back to the SDDC Manager that way. Or you can target the SDDC Manager, and the SDDC Manager will pass that onto the Virtual Center to do the configuration.
So we'll have a look at some code for this one. So there's kind of 2 folders for this. Do you want to talk about that, James? Or I think I might have wrote that, so I won't leave you hanging on that one. So what we are doing on this particular one, again, is now creating that provider in there. We're connecting, in this particular case, I'm using a slightly different commandlet on this one for connection, but I'm just passing a JSON file in for simple speed, ease, and away it would run. And then the second part of that is, apologies, I think I got that the slightly wrong way around. Was that the vCenter one? No, that's the VCF one, sorry. And then here, we actually have the one for the virtual center. So, sorry, I didn't quite catch you then.
You just showed in API. You don't have any API calls for assistant?
No, not in this particular example, no. Because again, it's going to look exactly the same as the other ones. They all do exist, but the complexities of doing it in that is going to take you a lot longer. Potentially, you're not necessarily going to want to be doing that on a day-to-day basis. Having the Power VCF commands where all the hard work is done is kind of where we're at. So that's kind of why towards here, this is where you want to be at in your evolution, really.
Again, around the Power VCF module, if something changes between versions, until you run, if you're doing the API way, you wouldn't know until you ran that, whereas the module will be updated to have those new API commands. So it takes that out of it as well.
And then the final bit of that particular demo is you've created an identity provider. You want to now allocate it. So there becomes a few more commands, and it starts to get a little bit more complex now because you're chaining different things together. You know, we've got SSO groups that we're now looking to get. We're getting users, and then we're starting to add them to each other, and we're creating those relationships between them.
And there's 2 different ways of doing it. One is fully variabilized. You can see that in there. And then the one at the bottom is straight out of the command. So both work, but one is obviously very variabilized, whereas the bottom one is a bit more manual.
And it comes back to that repeatability and reusability. Hard coding it isn't as reusable and as repeatable as when you've got it variabilized. You can just feed those in from any other source. Okay, I think we've got one more demo and 2 minutes to quickly squeeze that into. We'll skip straight to it. Storage policies. 4 commands. This one's a little bit more complex. This is actually now making use of PowerCLI. So we've got storage policy based management storage policies, which is a bit of a mouthful. Rule sets, rules which go inside of rule sets, and then actually applying a storage policy to an entity like a virtual machine. So we'll have a quick look at that bit of code. And here we are. So a little bit more complex. We're chaining things together. So if you see on line 8, for instance, I'm specifying that I want to create a new rule set. Within that rule set, I'm wanting to create new rules that don't exist yet, but I don't want to do those rules separately. So I'm actually nesting those inside of the rule set command to say, we want to go and grab some storage policy capabilities that exist. So whether that is replicas, IOPS limits, stripes, those kind of values, provide those values into a rule set and create a storage policy, which is what we're doing on line 15. And then it's a case of actually assigning this policy to something. It's great having a storage policy, but if you haven't given it to anything, you've probably just wasted your time. So one key thing to probably just note here is that top line, line 20, is applying it to the virtual machine object. If you do that alone, it's only going to apply it to the VMX file. And you're going to probably be a bit confused as to what just happened or why did nothing really occur. It's because of the granularity that you can apply different storage policies to different disks and different objects of a virtual machine. So in the second line, what we're doing is we are grabbing every single disk which exists on that virtual machine, and then we are assigning, if I can actually get this to scroll nicely, assigning the storage policy to those disks. And then if you were to look in the UI, you would actually see then that the entire object, rather than just part of it, actually has the storage policy and hopefully is now in the state that you would like it. We are at time, so I'm not going to necessarily show you that quick demo. If anyone wants to come and see us, we'll be hanging around anyway. Happy to go through any of the demos that perhaps were a little bit too quick. And yeah, oh, come on. I hate multiple screens. There we go. Please do take the survey. It does mean a lot to us to get the feedback. We have apparently just been told we may have 5, unless I've misunderstood that, we have 5 minutes for questions. Thank you, Frankie. So we'll leave that out there for staying connected quickly. If you want to reach out to myself, I am on Twitter or X or whatever it's called these nowadays. So if you wanted to reach out, follow any content or have a chat, hit me up in there. James just doesn't do social media, so you won't find him there. There's a website there that happens to have my name, but we share it now. We're in the middle of trying to rebrand. So there's lots of content up there. All of the decks and demos for today will be available if you want to go and have a look at them again. All of the code will be on GitHub, probably in a day or so. Or search for our names on LinkedIn. And in that, let's just give a quick shout out for any questions. Did anybody have any questions you wanted to ask? Yeah, we'll take questions. And as a question asker, you get one of those. Sorry, you can grab that one. Anybody else want to ask a question now? There's a token in the mix. No?
Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining. Appreciate you hanging with us. Say we'll be stood over there for a little while if anyone wants to come and chat further. Thank you.
Thank you.